mesdames et messieurs, bonjour à tous. Good morning. Listen, the energy we're going to need up in here is going to be all the way up there. I'm taking the same tone that Dr. Mo Ibrahim takes with these panels. We talk a lot as Africans, but we don't implement, so we're going to have some real conversations. You guys ready for that? Awesome. And halfway through the conversation, you'll have a chance to ask some questions and say some tough things. We want it to be uncomfortable in here. You ready? This is about delivering the Africa we want, amplifying Africa's priorities. My name is Larry Mido. I am an impatient, frustrated African, and that's the energy I'm bringing into this panel. Sounds good? Cool. Let's bring out the panelists. Then we can do this. Please welcome to the stage Her Excellency Nadia Feta Alaoui, Minister of Economy and Finance of Morocco. Thank you. Also joining us, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, the immediate past Vice President of Nigeria. Please welcome as well Nardos Bekele Thomas, CEO of the African Union Development Agency, New Partnerships for Africa's Development, NEPAD. Professor Carlos Lopez, Professor at the Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance at the University of Cape Town. And last but not least, Joe Lemeron, an MIF Now Generation Network member. I made a cardinal mistake by forgetting one of my panelists. So as you can see, this is beginning well. Please welcome to the stage Her Excellency Lerato Matabohe, the Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy at the African Union. You know who she is because she came up on the stage like, yo, what happened? So I apologize. So because you were forgotten, you get to go first. And I have a lot of issues with the African Union that I will get to in a second. But let's start on a nice, easy tone. What is the Africa you want? You just took this role recently, so you're kind of just getting your sea legs in.
Yeah.
What is your vision for Africa?
Thank you, Larry. And I hope this is the last time that the African Union is forgotten. Because really the African Union and the Agenda 2063 has set the right tone for the Africa that we want. The Agenda 2063 says we want a prosperous and integrated Africa that is driven by the talents of its people. So the priority then for us is how do we begin to have the principles of connecting the continent, the principles of making sure that whatever we do industrializes the continent, and the principles of making sure that whatever that we do has African content within it, be it the participation of our people in the projects that we deliver on, or African financing that gets crowded into our various projects. I think one of the critical risks that we have found after the review of the first 10 years of Agenda 2063 is that over 70% of our projects and programs are funded by external partners. That is a huge risk. So if we really want to deliver the Africa that we want, we're going to be very serious, have to be very serious about African contribution financially, technically, and otherwise in our own development. And those are the hard questions that member states leaders civil society, private sector on the continent will have to confront, because we are really overly dependent on external partners, and Africa has to take charge of its own destiny.
How can we do that when our external partners are starting to get tired of us and they're not sending us as much money as they used to?
Is it back to me? We can certainly do that. I know for a fact that there are resources on this continent. There's calculations, actually, there's a report coming out on Friday, and it says that we have $4.6 trillion in domestic capital. The question is, where is it? The question is, why are we not deploying it to our own development? And we can identify where it is because our DFIs are there. We've got deep capital markets in countries like South Africa, etc. But the issue is coordination. Why are we not all speaking in one voice and making sure that we deploy all these resources to infrastructure development, to integrative projects, to energy projects, for example? So that is the issue, Larry. The resources are there on the continent, domestic African resources. But they're fragmented, we are not coordinated, and there's just a general perspective of over-reliance on external partnerships and external capital than looking inward for intra-African investments and for the deployment of African capital. And that is the issue, and that is why this conversation and this dialogue this week is very, very critical, because we need to unlock that African capital. It's there, but
Right.
Why is it not being deployed where it needs to be?
That's a good way to bring in Minister Alawi as Minister of Economy and Finance. This is what you think about day to day. The money's not coming, but we still need money to finance all our development. So how are you thinking about this?
Good morning. First, thank you for having me. Yes, as Minister of Finance, you will talk to me more about money, but it's not about money. Let's respond to the money. I think first we need to have the houses in order in our countries, and this is what our country has been doing under the guidance of His Majesty. It's been a long journey of reforms, and we've been, I would say, increasing the local revenues because we were able to build trust. We are having strong social benefits, easing the business, and therefore we were, in the last 3 years, able to increase tax revenues by 30% and fund for all the social reform, education, health, social protection. Public sector is still very strong in investment, but despite this, we still need more money to flow. But for this money to flow, what I want to share here with the international partners, that we need cheap money, concessional money, but not overpriced recipes and expensive recipes. And I think that the model in Morocco is really relevant. We had our own reform that stick to our, I would say, reality, close to our needs. So today, if we want money to flow, but very expensive recipe, it doesn't make it. And we have in the continent talent experts, they're all over in this room, that knows what needs to be done, but for this we need more money.
So even if we do get that cheap money, the recipes are not our own. So a lot of the money goes into just making this recipe work. Is that your experience?
Let me give one or two examples. We've been very bold in investing in renewable energies. Our country today has a capacity of 42% of electricity in renewable. But you know that you cannot just rely on wind and solar, you know intermittence. And for some reasons, years back, gas was not allowed, was not a clean energy.
Right.
And because of the war in Ukraine, by magic, gas has become again a clean energy.
Yeah, right.
And we lost time. And we have a lot of countries in our continent having oil and gas. We haven't been polluting the planet. We are suffering from the pollution. So please, if we have our internal resource with maturity and responsibility, let us use it for the right purpose. This is one of these examples when we say international regulation have to fit to reality and not just be political, I would say, topics.
Isn't it fascinating how a war can clean up gas? It was dirty and now it's clean again because the supplies have dried up. Professor Sinbajo is laughing. Now that you're there, now that you're no longer in office, and you can speak more frankly.
Thanks for me.
Unlike the minister. Are there decisions you made in government that you regret?
Well,
Yeah.
well, let me say that there are things that could have been done better. One is a greater focus. If you look back today at what's going on in the Sahel, West Africa, and several African states, there's a definite backsliding in democracy. There's anger out there that, people feel completely disconnected from government, and a lot of it is blamed on democracy. People say, look, democracy isn't delivering.
Right.
So there's a lot of romanticization, again, of military rule. All of a sudden, people are, romanticizing military rule again.
People are romanticizing, for instance, the most popular African leader on social media right now is Ibrahim Traoré, the military ruler of Burkina Faso, because people think he represents what works for Africa and not this imported democracy that has not worked for the people of the continent.
But the reality, of course, is that what we need to do is to be more focused on people-centered government or governance. And that really may sound cliche, but it really is the reality. In other words, there's a need to understand that the vast majority of people are the deciders of whether or not our democracies are working, whether or not our governments are working. So there's a need to focus, even in budgeting, in planning and policy, around that bottom of the pyramid, which happens to be the largest portion of our own societies and economies. So where in the past would focus on a top-down approach, where you'd say, well, so long as you give the right incentives to industry and to investments, everything should be all right, and then benefits will trickle down. I think it's more important for us to concentrate on the largest portion of society, even in planning and policy. So thinking through even budgeting, to start from that bottom of the pyramid. So issues like, rural healthcare, public education, clean water, and, the other things that may be considered social costs. Smallholder farming, for example. Well, these are great investments, really, in the economy, and especially because it affects that bottom of the pyramid. It makes the most sense. So for me, I think, the most important thing today is to try and connect the people back to government. And the only way to do that is to show the people that government actually works for them. And the vast majority of people today don't think that government works for them because they're not involved, they're not included. Even in planning budgets, the whole idea of inclusion. Of course, there's a lot of irreverence on social media, but we can use social media to advantage also by consulting more, using social media to consult more, even in planning and policy and budgeting.
Did you guys hear an answer to the question? No. Regrets.
Sorry?
Regret. Anything you regret from your time in government?
I thought I had successfully evaded the question.
And I ask questions for a living. I can tell when somebody's trying to evade them.
Well, I think if there is to be a regret, it will be that a lot more could have been done in terms of connecting government to people,
right.
Consulting a lot more, especially in planning and policy, and dealing with that bottom of the pyramid more, investing more in the bottom of the pyramid as economic policy.
Right. Professor Sinbajo, what does it say about the failures of democracy in Africa that most Africans are willing to take a chance on military rule? You're coming from Nigeria, which is a long history of military rule.
Mm-hmm. I think first there's a very heartwarming study that came out of the UNDP in 2021, I believe it is, yes, which said that the vast majority of people, of course, are dissatisfied with democracies in Africa, but only 11% want military rule. So the vast majority still believe that democracy could work. So I think that there is a good, yeah, it's more than a glimmer of hope with respect to democracy. But we have to work at it, you know, and I think that a lot of that depends on government. A lot of that depends on governments. I mean, there are so many issues around even the management of public resources,
Right.
corruption, as we've heard, you know, especially in procurement and those sorts of things. I think that there is a sense that government is just for an elite, is for those who manage to get political power, you know, and that is not for the people. And there's a need to really reconnect with the people if this is going to make sense, especially in the coming years. And with aid drying up, with, you know, all the various challenges here and there, we really have to work harder at making democracy make sense for the vast majority of our people.
All right. Ms. Bekele Thomas, Africans are impatient, not just me, many Africans are impatient, and your job is to try and sell us on the dream of what's possible. I guess that's your full-time job at NEPAD. What is the Africa you want?
Thank you very much. Good morning. It's a good question. Like you, I have really, you know, I'm impatient. And sometimes, you know, I have nightmares and, you know, do not sleep because there are so many things to do, but with little capacity, little funding, and, you know, it's just impossible to meet the needs of Africa. On top of that, when you think that you are there, then some shocks come and they just destabilize you. And that is something that is very important to attend to. We need to really refine our planning processes, our strategies, not only to address the deficiencies of yesterday, the current problems, but also anticipate, you know, the future shocks and plan for them. The second thing is planning without budgeting is meaningless. And we need to really make sure that planning and budgeting processes speak to each other. The third thing is we have, you know, over the last 40 years as a development practitioner, I have known and I have learned that, you know, this whole silo approach is not working. Development is interrelated, integrated. You cannot address health issues without really making sure that the finance speaks to it, the planning speaks to it, not only just the sectoral one, the horizontal linkage, but also making sure that the other support institutions, you know, support it. I mean, you know, sometimes it's really meaningless for ministers of planning to do their planning without inviting the academia, because the inputs for the delivery comes from there. You need to know how many doctors you need, you know, if you want to have health sector, midwives you need, nurses you need, and this is just part of the planning, and all those need to be incorporated in the planning. So this is also critical and very important. The third thing that has been missing is that really the integration of our private sector. Private sector really has to understand development processes, you know, which public institutions, if they do it efficiently and effectively, I put an if there, because there is a trust issue. If they do it well, that is risk-taking, you know, and really making sure that the conducive environment is put in place for them to flourish. So, you know, all these things need to be seen in an integrated manner at the level of the national.
But
I'm saying this, you know, because although we are at the continental level, we land at national level. You know, and that linkage between continental, regional, and national is critical. Our solid foundation rests on the countries, on the member states, their strength, their capacity and capability to really deliver to the people. And that's what makes, you know, the continent to be stronger. If we are there just with our Vision 2063, which rests as vision, okay, translated into, okay, 10-year implementation plan, but all these plans need to be integrated and implemented at regional level and at national level.
how do you plan when your best talent wants to leave? You mentioned doctors, for instance. The best trained doctors in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Zimbabwe do not want to stay in their countries. They're looking for passports and visas to go to the UK, to go to Canada, because they don't have any faith in their countries.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, the Africa we want is not for us elites that have got the privilege to stay in the country. It's for the people, the youth, the new generation, the next generation that comes in. And if we do not give them hope, then they would leave. I mean, we are all human beings. I left my country because I was looking for something better. If I don't get it within, and if I'm not facilitated, I'll leave. And that is the most important critical element for us to understand. It's not only economic growth. 20 out of the 55 countries are now middle-income countries, but it's not that. The inequality issue should be addressed. We have to really put as many stakeholders in the economy for them to feel that they belong. They are part of the movement. And unless we do that, nothing would work. How can we plan? How can we work? How can we develop without our 60%, 70% of our population? It doesn't work that way. We need to really figure it out. And our political processes also should be fit for purpose. Right now, we have got the executives, the development. When we say government, we're talking about the executives. But it's not only that. In many countries, the political processes go against what the government does. So you need to really have that holistic approach, and we need to have, really cognizant of all these factors and design our own development processes and development means and implementation plans and systems. We work with systems that are old to deliver something new, and it doesn't work that. So, we need to really have that all reform in our countries. We need to have the reform in the regional level. For us, in the African Union Development Agency, we are interested to implement, to realize the Agenda 2063. Yes, certainly. We have got the 10-year implementation plan. We have got the 7 moonshots. They would remain as ambitious as they are, a dream not to be fulfilled unless we put, systems in place, build capacities, capabilities, and make sure that the institutions are strong to carry this development. Right. Yeah.
Professor Lopez, I hear this reform word a lot, and you've helped make it popular because you were part of the African Union reform system. How are we always reforming, but we never quite fully reform?
Well, if you want really to isolate Africa's performance from the rest of the world, you are going to have very bad news. But, yes, we are off track in relation to our Agenda 2063 goals. What about Agenda 2030, which is the global agenda? It's even more off the mark. What about the Paris Agreement and the climate targets? It's even more off the mark. So let's temper a bit our pessimism. I think it's very important for us to realize that even the discussions about the end of aid are a bit exaggerated to a certain extent. Because, we have ended colonialism about 60 years ago. We are still living with the reflexes of colonialism. In the mentality, in the mindset, we are still predicated on self-deception, and we try to make everything appear as normal when we knew there was a lot of hypocrisy and that we're not actually doing what we meant and said. So the same is going to happen with aid. The financial part of aid is touching the end, no doubt. But what about the aid mentality, which is about the institutions that we have created to deliver development in a certain way, not changing, and trying to sort of box what we are going to do in the near future according to instruments, tools, approaches, processes that are very much enshrined in this idea of aid, right, which is the idea of asymmetry, of dependency, of not letting us exercise our agency, and therefore basically limiting the scope of what the ambition of Africa should be.
Your new book is actually about that, the self-deception trap, and you explore the economic dimensions of charity dependency, specifically within Africa-Europe relations. So is your argument that we have to break away from that dependency if we're to really have agency?
Yes, we have indulged on interpretation of certain concepts that are the basis of how we envisage development that are misplaced, or at least, are not really giving Africa the real chance that it deserves. I identified, for instance, the concept of comparative advantages. That has been sort of the idea that we are good in natural resources potential, therefore, natural resources is the way our economies are associated with. That's an extractive mentality. And we have not had value addition precisely because we have not moved into dynamic comparative advantage. We have been almost instructed through policy to do things that were to meet our external obligations. It was not about transformation. So if I go back to what you were discussing with Nardos, I would say, in my books, we only have two typologies of leaders in Africa.
Right.
We have the rent seekers and we have the reformers. Whatever political arrangements are in place, for me comes second. Because I think if you actually win elections, but you are a rent seeker in terms of your mentality, you are not going to do anything for your country.
Right.
But you may be a reformer and not necessarily have the best of the democratic credentials, but you are going to be much more in tune with what people really expect from you. I think this is a very important discussion for us to have.
Right.
I call it, we need to Africanize democracy rather than democratize Africa.
Well,
I have to follow up on that. I feel like many of us might know the answer here, but in your many decades of scholarship in this field, do we have more reformers or rent seekers in Africa?
Well, I would say the reformers are gaining ground, but they are the minority still.
Where would you classify Ibrahim Traore?
Well, definitely he's not a reformer. What that phenomena reveals is that we are changing the paradigm of what we consider to be soft power. And that's why, Mr. Trump also can do what he does. Because now soft power is no longer exercised with the tools and the instruments of the past, like, for instance, aid in the case of the US. It's exercised through social media, through the mentalities, through getting directly into changing people's behavior and believing in fake. Because a lot of what is surrounding Mr. Traore's popularity is completely based on fake.
All right, on that bombshell. Joe, now that you've heard all of them, what is the Africa you want, and what is the thing you want them to know?
Of course, Larry, I want an Africa that can feed itself. Of course, I want an Africa that can power itself. Of course, I want an Africa that's prosperous and peaceful, like Mo said yesterday. But I think the other area that I really want us to also, and it came out in a lot of the conversations yesterday, is how do young people thrive in this continent? And I couldn't agree more with Dr. Ngozi, because the future is here, and the future is now, and that's why I'm part of the Now Generation Network. The future is now. The conversation we've been having, we need to act on them. And I think we have a really powerful blueprint in the name of the Agenda 2063. I feel it's important for us to really look at these next 10 years of accelerations, the second 10-year implementation plan, to really move the plane out of the taxi. We've been on the tarmac for way too long. We need to take off. We really need to take off. Young people are very impatient about all these conversations we've been having. I think it's time for now to see, hey, what are some of the things that we can actually, come in and use it and use the solutions actually to provide some of the acceleration that is required to thrive. In many of the conversations I'm having with young people, I think one of the questions is if our continent is rich with natural, human and cultural capital, then why is the progress so constrained, And if there's any time that we need to get that reality check that DSG Amina Mohammed was talking about yesterday, is now. So let's get to that. Let's start looking at human capital development away from just looking at a social policy to an economic strategy. How do we actually go to educational systems and make sure that they nurture digital literacy so that children in Cape Verde can be able to talk to their peers in Uganda? How do we make sure that we uplift them and give them the potential to do the best that they can do? How do we make sure that our systems are also are able, for example, to nurture entrepreneurship resilience and make these young people also become environmental conscious, etc. We were talking about earlier about how do we also make sure we channel our own engineers and scientists and specialists who will process our mineral wealth and green infrastructure, etc. And also at the same time, just to pick up from Professor Lopez, in the area of R&D, so how do we also make sure that we support some of these frontiers technologies? AI, we had conversations yesterday about AI and biotechnology, etc., to transform the global economy. I think that's the space that we need to get to, but too much talk will not get there. We need to get to a place where we now take off. Some of the ideas, and I'm looking forward to some of the sessions that we'll be having later in terms of domestic resource mobilization. How do we get to open the tax base, use digitization to make the system more efficient, more effective, innovating financing. Again, looking forward to another session on trying to see what are all these diaspora bonds that we're talking about, the blue bonds, the green, the panda bonds that are also out there. How do we also make sure that those instruments work, and most importantly, they work for young people?
My sense, I might be wrong, so I'd like to hear from you. It's easy to sit in these sorts of panels, in these kinds of rooms, and to be optimistic about what Africa and the potential, all of that. But the vast majority of African youth especially are pessimistic about the potential because they don't see it happening. That's where the risk coming across to North Africa and crossing the Mediterranean to try and seek a better life in Europe, because they don't think this is working for them. Okay, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I think it's very important. I mean, I'm a mother and grandmother, and I understand, the plea, the anger, and it's very important that we address that. I mean, there's so much paradox in all these things. First of all, when we talk about the empowerment of youth, I mean, there are many projects. I mean, the development space is overcrowded with innovation hubs and all these, accelerator hubs, skills and whatever. But the quality of it is really wanting. And therefore, we need to map all these activities and set standards for Africa and also build on knowledge. What works should be promoted, but what doesn't work should be, left out. I give you an example. In 1990s, early 90s, I was private sector policy advisor, and I developed a manual for entrepreneurship training, and I did that in Uganda. 2024, fast forward, I go to visit a village, and the same kind of manual is used to train people. I mean, what do you expect in this age of technology, such things to happen? So we need to really address this paradox. There is the public service that is crying out for skilled labor, they need capacity, and the capacity is there idle. How do we match? How do we bring it? And of course, the wage bill is so high that they cannot afford to get, additional, recruitment. But we can help. There should be a means of coming out with a program, and that's why we put this program, Energize Africa, to train, skill them, and then put them, integrate them in the public service to modernize the public service. The second thing is really map out all these, skills, empowerment, and whatever, and then see what is fit for purpose, and try to build on the best practices and scale them up. The third thing, which is very important in my opinion, is really to support the startups, to support the MSMEs and make them grow. And in order to support them, it's not just giving them some money, it really requires a judicious mix of support that could help them and push them to grow. And I think, we need a deliberate, intentional programs that support our youth and help them to be, a productive asset of the continent and not be a threat to the society. And that's where you see instability, actually. And I will come to the next one, which is our Nexus program. We wallow in crisis, we manage crisis all the time. And we don't address the source of the crisis. And we need to really come out with a program. We have one program, which is the Nexus program, which is peace, and development. And we need to accelerate that. We need to take preventive action to make sure that we capture. We need to measure the pulses of the people to see what works, what doesn't work, what is their feeling, how do they feel about their government, and that is what APRM does, and we need to respond to their needs. I think for the young ones, it's very important that they be in an environment where they do not feel as if they're not needed, they're not wanted, they're the threat, they're secondary. They are part of our, asset. They are really the driving force. They are the power of development and power of economic growth. And we need to consider them as that and invest in them. And when we invest in them, it's not just lip service, but we have to do it in a very transformative way.
Right. Professor Lopez.
I wanted to take you on this, why are the Africans crossing the Mediterranean?
Right.
The number of Africans crossing the Mediterranean in 1 year is equivalent to the number of Latin Americans crossing Rio Grande in 1 month. Mm-hmm. I don't want to take anything out of the suffering and the tragic dimensions of this movement of people. But I think demographic anxiety is in the wrong hemisphere. We are basically discussing overpopulation or Africa population boom with a frame of the 20th century. What we need really to realize is that we have to manage aging, not overpopulation. We have to manage aging because it's going to alter completely the way labor markets are organized. It's going to create a completely different type of consumption in the future. The more tech-intensive products and processes are, the more appealing they will be for a younger population, more difficult they will be for aging population. You have a situation where in a country that is the oldest, like Japan, the baby diapers are less sold than the adult diapers. So we have really a situation where by the end of the century, we are talking a completely different reality in the wealthier countries because their aging challenge has not yet been absorbed and has not even become central to their policies, and it should. So what the world needs is actually to manage mobility in a way that is going to be conducive for win-win situations. I know win-win situations are not really the rule of the day. We are all becoming very transactional,
right.
The fragmented fluidity in the governance systems, global public goods as taking holidays, and we are in a very difficult environment. But this being said, despite all of that, there are realities we will not be able to ignore. And one of them is that with artificial intelligence, this value that we have attributed to services, that is the part of the economy that produces most value, is going to be challenged immensely because, the regimes of intellectual property are going to be imploding. Artificial intelligence steals, recreates, and it's very difficult to attribute value to property associated with knowledge because it's not the way the work is going to be in the future. And this is going to create opportunities for digital migration. A lot of jobs are going to move out of the current geographies to other geographies just because, it's not just that we need the arms of people. It's because we need the brains of the young people.
Right.
Because they are the ones who are going to process a lot of what the services are going to demand in the future. You can keep control by having the best ecosystems for data centers and having the energy for them, because 10% of the energy in the future is going to be for data centers and requirements of artificial intelligence if nothing is done about improving the technology that we know right now. You can definitely create a situation where through taxonomy, through different forms of control, you keep the value with the ones that have the capacity to produce the codes and the capacity to produce the chips. And this is going to be a very skewed world, because the number of actors in that space is going to be extremely minimal. Those who have already become extremely rich thanks to it are going to become ultra rich. It's going to be insanely rich unless regulation kicks in and basically tames that trend, which means that yes, the wealth in the wealthier countries right now is more evenly distributed than it's going to be in the future. And people will start living out of their savings because of the aging rather than having the young entrants into the economy. So when you describe it like this, Africa is the future, whether they like it or not. Because, managing aging is going to be the real challenge, not overpopulation.
Okay. I'm glad that Professor Lopez said he was not trying to minimize the suffering of the people that cross the Mediterranean to try and get into Europe. Minister Lawi, you were saying that they should be talking to the finance ministers about this specific problem.
Yes, I think that the way we have this European policies about migration is some type of answer to the anxiety of the poor pockets in Europe.
Right.
I think it's more a deeper topic of economic imbalance. And the migration conversation would happen with foreign affairs ministers and interior ministers. I think it should be happening with the finance ministers. Because first, regarding the brain drain, I looked at a number lately on France that would need 100,000 engineers per year from now to 2035. They don't have them, and they won't have them. We need in Morocco thousands of engineers in all Africa. So the easy one is allow for more financing, double the figures yearly, so that we have the engineer we need and happy to share the other engineers we need. And we are talking about the talented youth that can afford to travel, can also have solution, and we are setting solution for crowdfunding, entrepreneurship. But we need jobs for all the others, and we need hope and future for all the others. And for those, we need economic solution and investment. And we're talking about migration. We just use this word for those who are jobless. And to have jobs, I am now sending a message, because the big multinationals are making good money in Africa, but they're not telling it in the narrative. We need the medium-sized companies coming and investing, because they are the ones who provide jobs. And for those, the blended finance, the guarantees, the rating are definitely not working. So in our economies, we need jobs in the rural world. We need very small entrepreneurs. We need very simple companies with decent jobs. And for this, no solution, real solution, structural solution for financing this economy, the one that is providing the jobs.
All right. Commissioner Lerato, I think a lot of the people who are here, if they're coming from the continent, they probably had to leave the continent to get back here. I flew in from Nairobi, and my layover was in the African city of Paris. I'm sure many of you went through the African city of Doha or Dubai to get here. The single African air transport market is part of your portfolio as Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy. Why is it so expensive to fly in our continent? And we just don't have the routes, we don't have the planes, we can't afford it, we can't get around.
No, indeed, it is. And as Professor Lopez mentioned, we inherited colonial models of infrastructure planning, including aviation, as it were. So this, single aviation, African air transport market is meant to redress that. It's specifically aimed at implementing the famous Yamoussoukro decision. We want to have an integrated aviation market on the continent.
The Yamoussoukro decision of 1988.
Yes, indeed. And this aviation air transport market, we actually promulgated in 2018.
Right.
From 1988 to 2018. Then COVID happened. So basically when we do our assessment of progress related to this particular program, we look at 2022 to date. What I can say to you is that from 2022 to date, we've had 38 countries out of all the AU member states sign on. We've had 97 new routes on the continent that have actually been implemented. And similarly, we've had a lot of harmonization, because what we're aiming to do, to have a single aviation market, we want to get rid of bilateral air trade agreements on the continent. That is the way to get us there. So there's a lot of technical capacity building, etc., at member states level to get to that. So I say this to you to say, yes, we are not where we want to be, but there's been huge progress in a very short space of time, in a span of 3 years. So our vision is that the next 10 years in the lead up to 2063, you're going to see a completely different Africa from an aviation standpoint. And we do have our lodestars and our great success stories. I mean, Ethiopian Airlines,
right.
It's been amazing. And that is the potential of Africa, and that is the Africa story that we need to tell. Not the fatalistic, we're not making progress, everybody's despondent. We are a continent of great potential and great examples of progress for the world, not just for ourselves. So this program is one of those. And unfortunately, yes, to come to Morocco was longer, but other countries have seen the benefit of integration. I went to Togo last month. Very easy to get to Togo from Addis Ababa. Previously, that was never the case. So we recognize that we still have a lot of work to do.
Right.
Particularly ourselves at the African Union to empower member states, but we've done quite a bit in the last 3 years.
All right. This is the thing about the Yamoussoukro decision, for instance, of 1988, promulgated in 2018. We just keep talking about this, and many are frustrated, rightfully, Professor Sinbaju. I remember speaking to President Kagame 2 weeks ago, and he said even he is tired because they agree on all sorts of things at African Union level that are never implemented. Yeah. Now that you're no longer in office, can you also say you're frustrated?
No, I'm not.
I'm just trying to get him in trouble all this time.
The truth is that,
right?
say, for example, if you look at the free trade agreement, the AFCFTA,
right,
it's evident that this can be a transformative instrument for Africa. But that must be seen as a sound economic proposition, and it must be led. There must be leadership. So, for example, we all agree, everyone agrees, and it's
a good
possibly
thing.
it was the fastest to be signed up as any legal instrument in the AU. So everyone agrees that this is an important agreement. But the real question is, where is the leadership to make it happen? So, there's a lot of progress, by the way. If you look at what has happened with the guided trade agreement, the guided trade initiative, the test run for the FCTA, it's evident that there's great potential. But it also reveals what the problems are, and some of the problems you've already mentioned, the infrastructural problems, So, for example, Kenya trying to, take their Exide batteries to Ghana,
right.
Took 6 weeks, under the guided trade initiative, because the shipment had to go first to Singapore, to be loaded, because obviously, there are, cabotage issues are a problem,
right.
If you're shipping from Africa. So you'd have to go up to Singapore or some European hub to load up before finally arriving at your African port. Well, these are the problems, but they can be solved. And what is required is leadership. And that leadership must understand that this is existential for Africa. And, sometimes we talk about trade, about free trade and all of that. And it almost sounds as if this is just one other thing. But the truth of the matter is that this for Africa is so crucial. It actually is make or break for us.
Right.
And if you look at what some countries, of course, many countries already are trying to, beef up their act and do better in terms of internal organization of their own businesses and all that. And I think local investments, what we're seeing in local investments is significant. What we're seeing in local infrastructural investment also is significant. But we really just have to be more intentional, more deliberate about seeing this as make or break for Africa.
Right.
And that requires a great deal of leadership.
All right. Thank you, Prof. I have some questions from the front row here and some interventions that I want to get in real quick. Dr. Jean Kaseya was here somewhere. I wanted him over there, the Director General of the Africa CDC, who wants to talk something about health financing in Africa. Could we get a microphone to Dr. Kaseya at the front, please? And then I'll take a few more in the 10 minutes we have left, trying to get Africans to speak quickly. Let's see.
Thank you, Larry. I'm so glad that I didn't get a question from you. I was wondering what would be this question. I want to thank Mo and Osh for inviting me. It was a late request because I said this is the opportunity for us as Africans, African leaders, to be here and to say what Africa is facing. I will just talk about the health area. I'm leading the health area in Africa, and this is my business. Africa didn't wait for ODA cut. Africa decided in September when I met President Kagame, I said, look, we have this Mpox, Marburg. What are we doing? Because I see the trend of financing is going down. And we decided to call head of state. We had 3 meetings of head of state, 5 meetings of ministers to produce this document that we call Africa, Health Financing in Africa in the New Era. That is the rethinking. Because let me tell you, 80% of ODA we are talking about, we are not reaching Minister of Health. They don't know. I was last week with Nadia in Abidjan. I was talking with Minister of Finance. They told me, we don't know what Minister of Health they want. What is the budget? How much they need? It means for us to raise more domestic resources, we need to have a strong plan. Do you know that there is only 16 countries in Africa with budgeted strong plan in place? And
only 16 African countries have a health plan in place.
It's in this document, only 16.
The rest are just running on vibes.
Aha. Then, what are we talking about? Let us restart the process. Let us have consolidated plan. Today, from countries that started to do that, we saw a huge increase. And I think having more domestic resources,
right,
good governance, more innovative financing will make Africa having more than 90% resources coming from Africa and less dependent on external resources. It's what I wanted. And let me tell you, colleagues, Mo took a photo of this book. Amina, you are the only one. Because I saw Moussa Faki took a photo with that. Tedros took a photo. Then I will come to you for a photo of this book, even now.
I love it. This is done. It's about Africans taking agency and financing our health agenda, and hopefully the other countries don't run on vibes alone. Let's get a microphone to this gentleman here, please. Okay, well, sorry, she's right next to you, so real quick.
He's our Minister of Jobs.
Right.
Good morning.
Good
My
morning.
name is Hanan Morsi. I'm the Deputy Executive Secretary for UNECA. Great discussion. Just a comment on what do we need to go to have the Africa we want.
Mm-hmm.
I think part of the issue is the need for us not to look backward, but to look forward. In many countries, we're trying to replicate growth examples of Asian countries of things that would not just work in the current environment. And for us to leapfrog, we have actually an advantage of being a latecomer to development. We don't need to do the development the same way China or Indonesia or Malaysia has done it. We can actually build on all the technological advances that has happened to actually accelerate that development. We don't need to build hospitals in remote areas. We could use drones to deliver these medical supplies.
Right.
So there are many ways in which we can think of doing it better, cheaper, and to really chart our way, unique way, not to copy from anyone else. And I think also being here in Morocco, it's one of the few examples of very successful economic transformation in the continent. Morocco has successfully, through deliberate action and strategies, managed to have, to move from, being highly dependent on phosphate exports to actually having electronics, aerospace, and automobiles overtake that. So this is the type of example that we need to see more. And Morocco has also worked to integrate more within sub-Saharan Africa. So I think these are the type of actions that we need to focus on more, and perhaps for the panel to tell us what they are committing from each of them to accelerate that transformation. Thank you.
Wonderful. That's a good charge for them. Let's get a microphone over here to the front. All right. I have 5 minutes and like 17 people that want to speak.
Thank you. My name is Younes. I'm the Minister of Employment, Skills and Small Enterprises in Morocco. I just want to point out one of the points that you mentioned, especially Dr. Carlos, is one of the pain points, I think, that we need to face and that we couldn't achieve successfully up to now is the capacity of our governments to reform. Because finding jobs, and Nadia, you highlighted this point earlier, we have a real issue within one mandate of 5 years, 6 years, depending on the countries, to have efficient governments, not in a programmatic perspective, delivering programs, but reforming deeply society and listening to the society we want to reform.
Yeah.
And for this to happen, we absolutely need to build a decision infrastructure where we can have social dialogue, for instance. I'm the Minister of Social Dialogue in Morocco, so I know that it's been very, very tough for 4 years now with other ministers in our government to build trust that Mr. Ibrahim was talking about yesterday. And this trust needs to be institutionalized through an infrastructure of decision. This infrastructure of decision helps governments to go through deep reforms, to reallocate means in order to unleash the potential of the society. One of the examples, for instance, that we're facing is to rework the relationship between our youth and time in the job and work and labor market. Our youth, for instance, don't want to work the way the other generations used to do. And for this, for instance, you need to have a new labor code.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So, and the ability to work with social partners within this very short period of time is one of the major challenges. And I think if we don't rework the infrastructure of decision, definitely we will fall into the programmatic perspective rather than deeper reforms. Thank you.
I think this might be the only Minister of Social Dialogue we have on the continent. All right, let's go over there. Sandao Jiambo, the CEO of UN Global Compact.
Thanks, Larry. And, the panel has been exceptional. If I was to add one more seat to the panel, it would be for a private sector leader. Because all of the constraints that the stellar panelists have spoken about apply to private sector. And I think it's so important to really look also at how we can get that missing $4 trillion from the private sector. Africa has some incredible private sector industry leaders. They lead in energy, they lead in digital, they lead in trying to also work alongside the AFCFTA to make sure that trade really does happen. And as we rethink what that Africa we want looks like, it has to be an Africa where businessmen can successfully trade, not only travel, we talked a lot about our travel restrictions, but our goods need to move.
Right.
They need to move between countries. We need high quality manufacturing outputs, and we need them to move. That's the first. The second piece I wanted to go to is really leveraging private sector balance sheets. We are looking for that 4 trillion. There's a lot of capital that sits within the private sector. We need to be sure that we can provide a couple of things for private sector leaders. One, regulatory and policy coherence, because that is a huge challenge. But secondly, the same challenges around cost of capital also apply to the private sector. The third piece, and I just want to look at what really the future trajectory of Africa looks like. There's immense GDP created and sadly lost through the creative and the sporting industry. Think about this. Top musicians, anywhere in the world, go to a concert in the Netherlands, they're singing along to Wizkid, whether or not they speak and understand Pidgin. Look at our football players, our basketball teams. Right. They're filled with African talent. I think we need to first recognize the GDP that the creative and the sporting industry brings to the continent. But secondly, from a policy perspective, we look at how we can support that GDP to generate more income in continent. But all of that to say, the other seat here, private sector leader, for your next panel, which we will hold at the Global Africa Business Initiative in September.
All right, Unstoppable Africa, New York on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. That's where to be. Let's get a microphone to her, my sister from Tunisia here. There.
Good morning. My name is Aya Shebi. I'm a Mo Ibrahim scholar, a Mujay leader, and Pan-African feminist. And I was listening to the esteemed panel, and I feel that we need to first agree that infrastructure, jobs, electricity are not just technical priorities, they're fundamental rights to the African citizen. If someone on the planet can have them, why we don't? And if another country that was colonized and the word that came out prosperous, why we keep counting the years, 60 years from colonization, 100 years from colonization, 1,000 years. And of course, we have to ground ourselves in colonial context, but we need to be much faster because I feel we have a different timeline as generations. Now, the Mo Ibrahim Index says that progress on the continent is not stagnated because of these priorities. It's stagnated because of global influence, or in another word, external interference, because of debt dependency, and because of the shrinking of civic space. So can we have as priorities Africa's dignity? Can we have as a priority Africa's self-determination? Can we have as a priority the protection of youth voices who are policed, politicized, and punished for just being African? Mm-hmm. Right? There is something boiling the last 2 days among young people around this announcement on Friday of China giving entry-free visa to 38 countries. Only 2 are African, Mauritius and Seychelles. So this is China's priority. As an African with a Tunisian passport, I need visa to Mozambique, but the Chinese doesn't. Where is the Africa Integration Project? When is it going to come to light? It's been 13 years since we adopted the Agenda 2063. So I guess my question to the panel, especially those in public office, how can we move from technical priorities to dismantling the political architecture that denies Africa's self-determination?
Thank you. I feel like I could risk everything you said was, as an African with a Kenyan passport, I need a visa to Morocco. So let's keep it 100. We just need to do a better job of being open. And she said something that's important. We have to wrap up because we're out of time. She said we can't look back, we have to look forward. But we spend so much time on the continent blaming colonial constructs and borders we didn't draw up and the things we inherited instead of taking agency for what we can fix. So anybody want to say final thoughts real quick in 20 seconds before they kick me out of the stage?
20 seconds.
Professor Lopez.
Fair.
Yeah, it's not fair. Yeah.
20 seconds is not fair, but I think this idea about the political construct, it's a very important element in the discussion. Because what really is stopping us from doing all the things you said brilliantly is the mindset. Mm-hmm. And I think we need really to have a discussion that is not just based on targets. You know, after all, the Agenda 2063 was an aspirational agenda. And
we're far off track.
No, to get to an aspiration, when it means that it's like almost like a dream. It's what we want. That's the Africa we want. It's an aspirational agenda, and an aspirational agenda does require a change in mindset. And so far, we have not yet met that challenge.
Right. Yes, real quick, Ms. Nandez.
I totally agree with what my daughter just said. It's true. It's very true. I mean, it's so cheap to just say, okay, fine, we will do this and we'll do that. It's very easy. But then to realize that, to put the money, the funds, to make it happen is the problem. And I would really recall, you know, the last speech that our former chair of the commission made when he left the office.
Right.
He just really opened up and he showed the frustration that he faced. I mean, we promise, but there are many unfulfilled promises. The first 10-year implementation plan, it was only 37% of it that was implemented. Why? We have got institutions without funding. We have to wait for others to give us money when the member states that have created us, you know, believing in us, do not fund us. So, you know, it's a commitment, and that political commitment, you know, should be really followed by the realization, the whole means of implementation. And that is what is lacking. You know, you do something and you leave it to others to do it, and that will not happen. You know, we need to fulfill our promises, and, you know, truly I agree what she said.
I'm out of time, but Joe, real quick.
Just on the mindset, since we're talking about financing the Africa we want, youth, the perception is not reality. We need to be funding the youth. Youth have amazing solutions out there. We need to develop very deep, fluid, and interconnected regional markets that are able to support some of the businesses that are led by youth. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. We're going to leave it there. I think if we want to take one thing from this, is that we have to get to work as Africans. We can't just be running on vibes and inshallah. Can I say that again so we make sure we get it? We have to get to work. We can't run the continent on vibes and inshallah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Please give a big round of applause.